So we started the sprint off by doing some initial user testing on students during DTR class. And we heard different feedback on what games users liked and what games users didn't like. There didn't seem to be consensus. What you're really curious about, what did seem to be more of a consensus, was users loved the noise that they heard when they knew they were getting a game. It was exciting people to trigger a game. One thing they also said, though, that if games weren't triggering, they were kind of nervous about whether or not there are games around. One change we made to address this concern was if there's no tasks around, it will say in red text that you need to go somewhere else, there's no games. And then if you go someplace where you are near a game, it will change to green and say there are tasks nearby. So this way, users know they're generally in the right location if the app is continuing to look for games without having to give away exactly where the games are. We also added a general map of playable area, so you can view what general areas on campus there will be games, so that way you know where you should go to find games. We ended the sprint by doing another round of user testing. Again, we saw the same general idea of finding the games was exciting. Games that were tied to specific locations, like a manhole in the ground or cracks in the ground, seemed to be much more exciting than games that were tied to an object like a tree, where there's a lot of them. One thing that happened during user testing was it said, look for a note on the bike, and there actually was a note on the bike. And it was this coincidence where a user was interacting with the world because of our game, and it ended up being really exciting. So one of our goals for designing games going forward is how can we continue to create more of these things we saw in user testing. Was often users would miss some audio and wish there was a way to replay the audio. They'd be like, oh, I missed that, can I hear that again? That's one thing to think about. Another thing was the storyline didn't really seem to have any beginning or end. It just was kind of a journey. There's no start or end, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. That's definitely something to think about when we're designing the games. There's no sense of progress. We tried to implement a score, but no one really noticed the score. It was more just exploring for the sake of exploring until, again, time ran up and we finished the user test. One thing we want to do next in terms of user testing is how can we user test in a more natural environment? While users are just going about their day, how would they actually play the app, not just in the user testing scenario? We learned is that you needed to have a high frequencies of games in the middle for users to really get into it. On the game, with one of our users, there were no real games at first, and it seemed to take that user more long to get into the game. But if a user was started off with a barrage of games one after another, they really got to get a feel for it. The first game was always a little rough, and the user was always a little confused. But after the second or third game, they really started to get it. So in terms of thinking about timing, that's an important thing going forward. And then after they've played their first couple games, then we can peter off and make the games come less rapidly potentially.